Happy Thursday, guys. We got a little autobiography today on our story. We're in the big reading book. We're on page 236. If you'd like to follow along, it says, read how the events of the civil rights era changed a girl's life. Keeping Freedom in the Family. Coming of Age in the Civil Rights Movement by Nora Davis Day. It's going to be about her. Autobiography is a book written about yourself. Here's the caption. The Davis family had a rally for peace in New York City. From the left to the right, Mom, Dad, Laverne, me, and Guy. Guy made our picket signs. I believe that's her up there. Could be wrong. What do we want? Justice. When do we want it? Now. As I held on to my father's hand, we joined the line of people chanting and walking back and forth in a picket line in front of Lawrence Hospital. The year was 1965, and the hospital workers needed more money and better working conditions. So there we were on a cold Saturday afternoon to protest. When I looked up, I saw soldiers on the roof of the hospital. I squeezed Daddy's hand a little tighter. The soldiers were there to protect us, he said. We were American citizens, and we had a right to gather and to protest. I raised my picket sign as high as I could. I wasn't afraid. I had Daddy and the American Constitution to protect me. I couldn't wait to get back home to tell my brother and sister Guy and Laverne about my day on the picket line. Dinner time was always special at our house. We would sit around the table, filling our mouths with food and our minds with ideas. Mom and Dad encouraged us to talk about anything we wanted to. Anything. Sometimes we talked about our family, about Dad's childhood in segregated Waycross, Georgia, and my mom's love for Harlem, the part of New York City where she grew up. Other times we talked about big ideas like democracy, freedom, justice, and civil rights. Some days Mom and Dad weren't home for dinner. They were actors, O.C. Davis and Ruby Dee. But because they were black, they didn't have the same opportunities and rights as other citizens. They decided to use their lives as actors to make a difference. They wanted to make America a place where injustice is not welcome, and where Guy, Laverne, and I would always feel like we belong. And so it was that my ordinary life of chores and homework and hopscotch soon became extraordinary. Every day there were new ideas to talk about at dinner. We learned new words like nonviolence, sit-ins, and boycotts. Whenever they could, Mom and Dad took us with them to programs, protests, and picket lines. 2 years later, in 1963, we had moved into our new house and had gotten our first television set just in time for the most important years in American history. We weren't allowed to watch TV during school week unless something really important was going on, like the March on Washington when Martin Luther King Jr. gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. I wish I could have been there with Mom and Dad. I asked myself what kids like me could do to make a difference. Later that year, I had an answer to my question. When 4 black girls were killed in a church bombing in Alabama, we realized that the fight for change would be hard, long, and dangerous. Mom and Dad encouraged us to think about how we could protest the bombing. Some people said we should boycott Christmas. This was our first Christmas in the new house, and the spirit of giving was important to us. So instead of boycotting Christmas, our family decided to boycott Christmas shopping. Instead of buying gifts, our family gave the money to the civil rights group. Guy, Laverne, and I gave each other gifts we had made with our own hands. And when the time came to hang the homemade paper holiday chain, I wrote the names of the girls on the last 4 loops. In our own way, we learned the true meaning of giving. When we gathered for dinner that night, we said a special prayer for the girls and for our country, and I knew that Christmas at the Davis house would never be the same. And then here's our timeline. 1950, she was born. 1962, they marched for peace. 65, the hospital workers picket. 20 years later, she boycotted the U.S. companies doing business to segregate in South Africa. 1959. Oh, I should have been going up and down here. I'm sorry. Guy meets Judge Wade's warning on championship civil rights. In 1963, the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama is bombed. 72, she votes in her first election. In 2001, Nora speaks to students at her local high school about social justice. All right, you got to keep your books now for our assignment. That was our little extra story for today. We got to turn back to Delivering Justice, and we want to take a look at the author's point of view first. It says reread the story. Complete the following to find the author's point of view. Now you can reread the whole story first and then come back to the worksheet, or you can read it as you go. I like to read it as I go, as I'm searching for these answers. 2018 and 2018. Page 218 and 219, it says, which detail on page 219 reveal the author's viewpoint about how Wesley's grandmother was treated? How was grandmother treated? What is the author's point of view? Which detail? So first we're going to get the detail and then say how they feel. 2019. Oh, I remember when they kept letting the white people come up first, and then she spoke to them like Mrs. and Miss, and then these people she treated like they were kids, like they were nobodies. So I'm going to go ahead and find some of that in here. I'm going to write that down. Here it is. But she treated Grandma as if she was a child, nobody. On one trip, the saleswoman would not serve them until after the white customers had been helped. I'm adding that too. I'm going for the A+. The salesperson would not serve them until after all the white customers had been helped. What was the author's point of view? The author's point of view, would they think this was a good idea, this is a bad idea? I'm going to put unfair. The author thought this was unfair. But this is pretty easy. You get a couple details from the story, and then, boom, you put down how the author felt about it. Turn the page. 2020, 2021. Now, there's only a short section here. Let's see if we can't master this one together. Which clues on page 220 tell you about the author's position? That means, what do they think? What is the author's point of view about segregation of blacks and white? Black people weren't treated as well as white people. That's pretty big stance or position. Most of the time they were kept segregated from whites. Wesley went to a separate school for black children. He had to drink from water fountains marked as colored. He could not sit and eat at Levy's lunch counter. I'm doing it backwards this time. What is the author's point of view? That having to be separate was not right or fair. I got all sorts of them in here. What clues? I'm going to put the last one first, because this Levy's thing was pretty important. He could not sit. Getting it right off the bottom of the page here. Could not sit and eat at the lunch counter at Levy's lunch counter. I got room for one more. I always try to fill up all the lines for my A+. I'm going to try to find the school. When Wesley went to a separate school, he had to go to a separate school. Okay, so we knocked out the first two. We got 1, 2, 3, 4 left. The last two only have one the last three only have one question. This one actually has 3 of them, so be careful to answer all of them. Why wouldn't schools in Savannah hire Wesley? Remember, because he was a member of the NAACP. What does the author point out about the Postal Service? Remember, the Postal Service hired everybody. Government agencies can hire anybody. Doesn't matter if you're a boy or girl, and it doesn't matter if your skin color is one color or another. And what can you tell about the author's point of view based on this comparison? That schools weren't very fair, but the United States Post Office was. So there's some hints for that one. I think that was fairly easy. All right, finish all of these on this side, and then on the back side this week, we'll do 3 out of 4. Give you a little bit break today because our story was a little bit longer. So go ahead and pick, how did you know this genre? You might want to talk about it having dates in it, that it went in chronological order, that it was very informative, that it was all about Wesley. Okay? Essential question, how did Wesley Wallace Law become a leader of his own community? Remember, he was an everyday hero. How did he become a leader? You might want to talk about how he helped people get voting rights. You might want to tell how he organized the boycott of Levy's department store. You might want to say how he organized the picket lines, taught them how to do it non-violently and peacefully. So a couple of hints there. And then your vocabulary, pick any 3 words and their definitions. Like I taught you earlier in the week, you can use the back of the book to help you. Or you can do the synonym, sorry, I always struggle with that word, and antonym section. Both of these have synonyms in the text, and what's the meaning of the word. All right, guys, that'll wrap up our Thursday, and then you guys can prepare for your test tomorrow.